everyone that's joining us, we'd like to thank you for your time. And we would like to thank you for making time in your schedule to join us for this webinar. What my goal today is for everyone to get a very high level understanding of what Section 321 is and what are the possibilities for your individual application. One of the things that is very key is making a decision of which service provider best suits your needs, or which service provider can give you headaches, right? So one of the areas that we want to focus on is making sure that you ask the right questions, gather the correct information to be able to make an informed decision and proceed with provider A, B, or C. And a lot of the times it comes down to specific needs, whether the provider has flexibility of what they're willing and not willing to do, and what the extent of capabilities of the provider is. So I'll dive into the presentation here, and let's talk about reshaping cost-effective e-fulfillment with a Section 321 strategy, right? So here we look at part of a moving aspect of what everyone deals with every day. Part of ocean containers coming in, part of customers making orders, specifically those of you that are in the e-commerce space. 321 Section 321 has created a very dynamic opportunity specifically for U.S. e-commerce brands. Given a couple of 24 months ago, when all of us were looking at skyrocketing ocean container rates, we were looking at sanction tariffs that were up to 30% for certain commodities, and that was a big shift for a lot of organizations. So that is what created the opportunity for Section 321, specifically for fulfillment from Tijuana, to become a booming industry. Right now we're looking at a very scarce availability of commercial real estate space, a very scarce selection of experienced providers. But at the same time, you're seeing a lot of venture capitalists, a lot of IT, a lot of startup infrastructure being built around Section 321, because we consider it, I consider it specifically a viable option that's not going to go away. I think the goal of what every service provider is trying to accomplish right now is how to make Section 321 viable even without the duty-free savings. So that's why you see a lot of disruption, a lot of investments from high-tech companies trying to get into the space. And that brings a certain dynamic. You have two worlds that are inverse. Some companies, for example, like G Global, we've been in the business for 100 years, right? We were one of the first brokers in Mexico. Our infrastructure is very seasoned. We have a lot of experience in cross-border logistics. So our operational capabilities far supersede our technical knowledge, right? So whereas when you have a tech startup that's tried and true, driven by technology first and operations second, typically those providers tend to focus around third-party vendors, meaning an outside trucker, or outside broker, et cetera. So you have two different business models and two different dynamics. I'll move on to the next slide here. And this initial slide talks about the dynamic flow of everything that comes into our facilities today. One of the areas that has to be very, very important is making sure that the port of entry and the documentation required from the brokerage department is filed appropriately for those of you that import through Los Angeles, right? Most of the dynamic opportunities are, if you import containers into the port of Long Beach, you open up an in-transit bond. In most situations, that container will end up in a facility around San Diego or around the border. Once that container ends up around the border, the responsibility of the service provider is to create commercial documents that allow that inventory to be held in Mexico, or in this case, Tijuana, under a temporary importer bond. That temporary importer bond can range anywhere from 18 to 24 months. Once the commercial documentation is done and completed, the product is then moved into a location in Tijuana, and it's either stored for X amount of period, or it's set up for B2C direct e-commerce fulfillment. Once the product is in Tijuana, technically you have virtual inventory. It's not officially imported into the country of Mexico, so therefore it does not pay duty while it's in Mexico. And it's not in the United States either. Okay, so that defines the temporary importer bond in Mexico. In order to get individual units or to get orders processed back, which is the phase 4, the outbound portion, there's a lot of things that have to work well, right? So obviously, primarily the things that have to work right out of the gate is the connectivity of systems. Some customers run on an ERP. Some customers are startups that run on Shopify. Some of them have very complex multi-storefront locations. So making sure that the inventory is reconciled with your systems in the United States versus what's actually happening at ground level with the provider in Tijuana, that's a very big aspect, right? And in order to prepare for the outbound piece, orders need to be dropped, whether it's in the batch, whether it's in the EDI. Your service provider will then pack those orders, make sure that they're sent the service required. What affects the end customer experience here is in a positive way is the end consumer should not know that the product was in Mexico. As far as the client would understand is the label should be generated with the address or location in the United States where the product is injected to third-party carriers, and that is UPS, FedEx, all of the final mile carriers. Happy to dive into any specific questions. I know this is one of the most complicated parts in the startup phase for any client is understanding, wait, how do we go from getting an ocean container delivered to a facility in Los Angeles to an ocean container having inventory that ultimately ends up duty-free in Tijuana? So any questions that anyone has, happy to dive into more details. The graduation, right? Or the second phase that most customers go into after understanding Section 321 is they bring in containers in through the port of Ensenada. When there's two benefits of that. So the port of Ensenada, the downside is, yes, the ocean rate may be a little bit higher than what you're seeing going into Long Beach, specifically in the market right now. But the big benefit for high volume importers is that you can dray or you can pull 2 containers at a time. So you get double utilization. And an average ballpark rate to dray a container from Long Beach into Tijuana, you're looking at about between $1,500 and $1,800 per container. That would include the pickup, the empty, and then circling back and returning the container. To do that same exercise and to do the same dray picked up in Ensenada, you're looking at a ballpark figure of about $800 to $950, depending on which provider you're working with. And when the dray is done, when the containers are pulled from the port of Ensenada and delivered to the warehouses in Tijuana, those can be double pulled. So you can pull 2 53-footers at the same time, and there are no weight limitations. So that's if you do the math calculation there, it's a very big improvement in cost utilization or money utilization for as far as getting product into the warehouse. And also it allows you to have a much quicker turnaround, because the process goes from, let's say, our SLA is 96 hours from when a container is pulled in Long Beach to get to Tijuana. That can turn into 24 hours or 36 hours for it to be on a yard to be unloaded into the facilities. So understanding these flows of goods to get them into a facility is very important. So definitely when looking at a service provider that's going to be offering Section 321 services, definitely asking those questions is very important. Areas to look at is, is the service provider outsourcing every portion of the supply chain? Do they have their own trucks? Are they outsourcing the US IT bond part? Are they outsourcing the Mexico customs part? How do those departments, or what visibility or what consolidation of information can they provide? Because the experience could turn pretty bad. It could turn where you're following 3 different vendors, 3 different teams, or it may be a different vendor for every container that comes in, which makes record keeping extremely difficult. So making sure that you audit and making sure that you ask the correct questions of, walk me through, who are your service provider? Do you do it in-house, or do you outsource 50, 100% of it, 20% of it? Are those very, very important questions that need to happen. Moving forward past the phase 2, when customers get into Ensenada, comes the questions of, what about manufacturing in Mexico? What about sourcing locally the packaging material, the corrugate? And that's when the service provider that does value-added services is very important. Do they do embroidery in-house? Can they do the embroidery in Tijuana? Can they source boxes at a much cheaper rate, or at an equivalent rate of what you're getting in the US or China? There's companies that purchase the corrugate in China and fly it in, or container ship it in. Those are all opportunities that a very seasoned service provider with experience in value-added services and a solid network comes into play. We'll move on to the next slide here. And this one talks about redefining your fulfillment location strategically. Costs of manufacturing are going up in China. The political climate making it very, very difficult to start to do business. Issues with Taiwan. What we're seeing right now is a lot of clients are asking, hey, can we manufacture goods in Tijuana? When is that going to be available? Do you have any infrastructure? And what we're seeing right now is a lot of manufacturing of footwear and a lot of manufacturing of apparel is readily available in Mexico today at the same level of quality. The vertical that still has a lot of work to do to catch up is high-tech manufacturing. I think high-tech is still, China is the dominant force of manufacturing, specifically for private label or individual applications. That manufacturing your goods in Mexico produces a lot of positive results. One of them is you don't have to ship goods across the ocean, right? Manufacturing your goods in China, if you do it there instead of being able to do it in Mexico, you're increasing the transportation costs, right? And a lot of other factors that affect it, right? Once product comes from China into the United States, we've heard here at G Global a lot of experiences where there's difficulty finding workforce or just labor in the United States that want to do fulfillment or want to do the warehouse activities that are required. This is very, very high level description here, but again, happy to jump into any specific details about commodities, about what qualifies for Section 321. Happy to answer it, to get into those details in the Q&A portion of the presentation. I'd like to move here into the slide here that calls out what are the high level checkpoints or financial benefits or metrics that every company that's exploring Section 321, what should be the metrics that they're looking for on a financial level, right? Obviously, you want to look at being able to save duty 100%. There's a tremendous amount of different models here in Tijuana. Some providers say, hey, we're going to bill you on services rendered, and we're going to allow you to keep 100% of your savings. You have other providers that want between 10 and 30% of the duty saved. That is their monetization business model. And obviously to the right is any provider that's giving you an offer, I mean, you should be seeing anywhere between 15 to 25% in operational savings. That's if you have a service provider that's outsourced in the United States. If you run your own operation, you have your own overhead, you're paying for insurances, you're paying for management. I mean, that number can multiply really, really fast, right? But that also causes some challenges, and we've seen it cause some conflict in between organizations, right? Because anytime that you're going to be removing internal assets to make a financial gain decision for an enterprise to go to Tijuana, obviously that means cutbacks, right? And obviously understanding those dynamics is very important as well. Real estate costs, right now real estate costs are a very finicky thing. Very surprisingly, right now the average per square foot cost in Tijuana, because of this rise of Section 321 fulfillment, just to lease a facility in Tijuana right now, you're looking at anywhere from 85 cents to 95 cents per square foot. That is for a fairly new facility that can sustain the infrastructure required to do 321 fulfillment. And that's pretty much almost on par with what the per square foot cost is in the United States. If we take a look at Los Angeles, which is where a lot of customers that are in South Los Angeles community look at going into Tijuana, those are the immediate metrics. Obviously, that number changes depending on what part of the country you're looking at. But the gain that you have by coming to Tijuana is where those savings add up is in the workforce cost, right? And the labor cost. I think that's where a lot of the gap is made up. And definitely the time schedules, right? It's a very fun fact in Tijuana or in Mexico, a normal workday is 9.5 hours, whereas in the United States is 8 hours. So if you multiply the math on that on a week per week basis, you should be getting that much more productivity out of a vendor or a provider than what you see today. And again, it's very well known that customs compliance and the product or individual orders have to be below $800. Anything above $800 is subject to a 7501 tariff, right? We've seen customers circumvent this a lot of different ways. Either they put a limit on their cart, on their storefront, and control it from that level, or split orders to ship on different days to keep that under $800, right? But again, that's a game time business decision for every one of our clients or any organization that's out there of how they want to affect the end customer experience. And on this presentation, which we'll share with everyone, on the bottom there, you'll see a link that gives you the specific information around the legalities, the technicalities of Section 321 to validate the information. Right now, we'll jump into a little bit about what our methodology is and how we attack or how we manage goods. Our mantra is to ultra simplify, right? And that speaks very big volumes into what the commitment is from each service provider, right? One of the things that's very important is finding cultural fit, right? For us, it's making sure that our values and our core values of what we bring to the table are an adequate fit culturally to the customers that are asking us for an RFP. We have to make sure that there's alignment there. We're very big on cultural values, and to us that's very important because we're one of the providers that are vertically integrated, meaning that the warehouses are run and operated by us, our payroll staff. The trucks and transportation is G Global units. The Mexico Customs is in-house. The Mexico Customs is in-house as well. And all of the facilities on the border are owned and run by G Global as well. So we're one of the few providers that provides 100% in-house service for all of the portion of related to Section 321. The only part that we rely on a third party is the ocean container coming in, and then the last mile where we tender it to carriers at customers' choices, right? Here we put a methodology of number 1, 2, 3, which, number 1 is obviously register, entry, specifications, and making sure that the product meets the criteria. Annex 24 is our software, proprietary software that's connected via API to Mexico Customs and US Customs. And it allows us to keep track and inventory of what's been imported and exported. So entry, it begins there, classification, making sure that the numbers match up with what's on file with both countries. The storage and fulfillment, it's, everything is automated. We scan product in, we scan product out. And it allows us to monitor the KPIs, and one of those important ones being inventory accuracy. And then the number 3, of course, is getting back into the United States. So being connected via API to US Customs allows us to automate a lot of the process. Most legacy carriers still do it manually, which requires 2 to 3 days to clear goods into the United States. With the correct service provider, can accelerate that process for you. I mean, for us, we're clearing about 5,000 individual 321 entries on a manifest. We're doing that in about 15 minutes because of that connectivity, which is what allows us to do pick and pack and injection within 30 hours. Again, those are to some organizations that may be a big value. To some of them, it may not. It depends on the individual application. And you can find service providers that fit any spectrum, right? If low time in transit, the most economical option is what fits, your business model. I'm pretty sure you can find and source the correct provider. Again, happy to run into any of the details here. But for sure, one of the things that you want to validate from any service provider that you consider is making sure that compliance is top of mind, making sure that your HTS codes, or they have a very expert team classifying HTS codes for the US and for Mexico, because they don't automatically translate. I would say those are, from a risk management perspective, those are highly boxes that need to be checked and validated during your review process of a provider. Here we'll discuss the key points to consider and making a decision of provider. And again, this is subject to opinion, but this is what we feel are the pillars of something that needs to work correctly in order for the entire process to work, right? Obviously, making sure that your provider has the correct brokerage licenses, right? Making sure that if they're outsourcing the brokerage part on either side of the border, making sure that it's vetted, making sure that there's an accountability process and a compliance process. End-to-end transparency, who has your goods at any given point when it's in the warehouse? Is it owned and operated by the service provider? When it's en route to the border to cross, is that a third party? Does that truck have insurance? Is it just brokered out to any service provider, and what are the risk details around there? Dedicated service for IT. Again, I talked about it early on about the integration and making sure that the service provider that you have has the capabilities to integrate with your requirements. For us, we're very technology friendly. We have an IT team in house. We have a full team of developers and programmers. So we've done everything from FTP folders, drop and pull information, to full API integrations with up to 15, 20 storefront connections. Those are things that we live and breathe every day, and tech support is in house. So making sure that the provider you choose has the capability and assets to do that is important. Transportation, consistent transportation. Going into peak season happens in Mexico and Tijuana, just like it happens in the US. Truckers pick and choose about who's going to pay top dollar. So making sure that the provider has the resources and the network to support your volume, again, is very important. And then lastly, These are not mandatory, but these are items that we are certified in, and we believe they play a big part in our success, right? Being CTPAT certified, ISO certified, and OEA certified in Mexico. I would say those are supremely important to making sure that stuff crosses the border north and south without any issues at all. So I'll move on to the next slide here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eddie, for all that valuable information. Again, this is an overview of how Section 321 has been implemented, so clients and your customers can also benefit of increased revenue, agility for your supply chain, and cross-border sales. Now, if you haven't yet shared with us your industry, please feel free to do so or submit any question that you may have. Currently, we will be sharing our presentation. If somebody else would like this presentation in Spanish, we can definitely do that so you have all that information. Also, Oscar asked us, Eddie, if we can do next day shipping with this Section 321 strategy and distribution model.
I would say that that's a very, very good question, and it happens quite often, right? Again, it depends on the vendor. For us, our capabilities, the fastest we can produce an order is have it injected into a carrier within 20 to 24 hours. So if the service that you choose for the final mile carrier is next day, you can meet that 2-day time in transit. So if we follow it play by play, if an order drops into our WMS in the morning, let's say 8 a.m., we pick and pack that order throughout the day. At the cutoff, which is typically between 5 and 6 p.m., we do a hard cutoff and we do an end of day manifest specifically per client. So when that manifest is cut, that's when the Annex 24 comes into play, and we send it to Mexico Customs and US Customs, and we get a green light back. And then once we get a green light back, that truck is loaded. It has a CTPAT seal on it. There's a lot of information that goes into that, including driver's licenses numbers, driver's names. And then in the morning, that truck crosses the border. The only thing that's out of our control that affects that timeline is whether the border is extremely busy. I would say the average crossing time is between 2 to 3 hours, specifically for trucks that are CTPAT certified. And then we inject into carriers. In our business model, the earliest that pickup that we have is we have a pickup by UPS, which is one of our largest carriers. They arrive first at about 11:30 to noon. And then from there, every other carrier picks up after that time. To manage the customer experience, this is where your service provider has to work with you to manage those expectations, right? When we tender the package to the carrier, they may scan it as a pickup, right? We will give you the update that it's been picked up. But if the carrier doesn't unload the truck that night, if let's say UPS doesn't unload that truck until the next morning and processes the tracking, then you're gonna have a bit of a lag, right? So I would say those are the two caveats that happen. But second day, I would say is doable for sure. Amazon Prime guaranteed next day. Section 321 is not a viable option because of the variables that you have, and you'll run into a lot of challenges with chargebacks from Amazon Prime and demanded next day delivery.
Thank you, Eddie, for the response. Again, if you have any follow-up questions, go ahead and add them either to the chat or the Q&A section here in Zoom. Now, another question we have, Eddie, is what are the most common mistakes when implementing Section 321?
From a service provider, I would say the biggest headache is not understanding what the expectations are from your customer and how that affects their business or what financial implications that means to them. So it could be chargebacks. For example, we have some customers that work with Target, that work with Bye Bye Baby, that they have very specific SLAs where, we have to use their carrier account and that's how they track everything. We have to do EDI into one and the other. So again, those are big headaches that the service provider should be proactive and make sure that they manage from the customer. I mean, from the customer as far as what SLAs can be committed to and achieved on a regular basis, and not have a lackluster performance. Number two is from the customer side is the biggest challenge that I can see is jumping into the unknown, right? The biggest challenge is, a customer that has never done any cross-border fulfillment has very limited information with customs. I would say making a decision without getting all of the details in a contract, getting all the details ironed out of what needs to happen, making sure that the ETF language in your contract allows you to be able to depart without any fees. If your service provider does not meet the level of operation. And again, if you're running an operation of above 100,000 square feet, going all in from the beginning, I would say that's a very high risk play unless you've really vetted out your service provider and ensure that they have the resources and they're able to support you in the long run to be able to do so.
Thank you so much. Also, how can a business or a decision maker in a supply chain start to consider if Section 321 may be right for their business model? What should they have in mind?
Number one is commodity, right? If you're a manufacturer, if you're an online seller, if you're a reseller, whatever the terminology that applies, is commodity is very important. Anything that requires PGA licenses, meaning Food and Drug Administration, fish and game. So if you're into exotic skins, if you're fulfilling anything that's consumable by a human being or an animal nowadays, you have to make sure that it's completely vetted and you're able to do it, right? So again, that responsibility is shared, right? So the number one responsibility is making sure that the vendor or whoever you're choosing to explore Section 321 with, making sure that they have a complete list of your SKUs, making sure that they have a complete list of the dimensions and the sizes of your SKUs is very important. In the manufacturing world is known as a tech pack, right? For example, in our world, when we onboard a new clothing client, we ask for tech packs, right? And those tech packs are going to tell us what are the dimensions when a garment is not worn on the waist, on the hips, the length, the arms, etc. And that's important for two reasons. Because a fun fact here is some of the items that in the US are classified as adult, in Mexico, they may end up classified as a kid's garment, right? And that applies a lot to lingerie, it applies a lot to leggings, not because it's made for a child, but because of the static measurements. So making sure that your vendor is going through all of those checkpoints. Number two is if you have multiple factories manufacturing the same garment or the same SKU, is very important to keep an eye on that tech pack, because one company may use 95% cotton and 5% another material. And then your next factory may use 97% cotton and 3% of the other material. So believe it or not, that may cause a change in the classification in Mexico. And for example, our software Annex 24, we have to keep a very strict count or inventory count of what product is being imported under what percentages and under what SKU. And when we process orders or when we fulfill orders, that API connection to customs, that is what we'll be deducting from your balance of goods. So if you end up overselling more than what you imported, there's your first problem with customs. They're going to say, hey, you only had 1,000 pieces, and you've processed 2,000 orders, like where did those other 1,000 pieces come from? Like what's going on here? So that's part of making sure that when you a good vendor, a good provider, when you send them your first container or when you do your first inventory transfer from a warehouse in the United States, likely they will do an audit. They will do a piece by piece count. They will ask you for the USHTS code classification. They will ask you for the measurements, and then they will reclassify it themselves to import it into Mexico under a temporary importer bond.
Awesome. Yes. So if logistics needs precision, this strategy, I guess we could emphasize that we need to make sure that the numbers are balanced and see beyond these obstacles, because it's customs compliance and it definitely is a complex operation that needs to be approached correctly and with the right experts. So thank you for that response. Again, Jeff, thank you also for your feedback. Please confirm if the chat is open. I have shared with you our contact information where you can visit our website and our social media if you would also like more resources. And Steve Gibbons shares us the following question. How are B2B orders managed? And do you have a San Diego facility for retailer carriers to pick up B2B orders?
That's an excellent question. 60% of our customers have a combination of B2C and B2B orders, right? And again, this is speaking only for G Global or G Fulfillment, not for any other vendor. Any order that is a B2B transaction, we receive it into our software. And then one of two things happens first. Either we validate the number of pieces and the number of count and making sure that we have it in stock. And then number two is before the entry is finalized as a 7501, we get a validation of duty that's going to be paid or the duty that the product is going to be subject to. And we need to get an approval on that amount before the duty is outlaid. Preferably, we like to have customers have an ACH, which allows them an additional 30-day to 45-day period, depending on what date of the month you're processing the transaction. Then the other variables will come in, right? When does the product need to be staged in San Diego? When does the other party or the end B2B customer need to pick up? All of those things come into play. And to answer the question specifically, yes, we have 2 facilities in San Diego. We have about 200,000 square feet. Both of them are CT Pack certified, and both of them one building supports our e-commerce business, which is injections into carriers. And these B2B, we call them transfers, these B2B transfers. And then the other building is for our traditional business, right? Vendors that pick up from us today regularly. Nordstrom's picks up from us regularly. We do wholesale orders for Nordstrom's. We prepare wholesale orders for Amazon. If customers want to transfer X amount of inventory to an Amazon DC in the United States, we keep the product in Tijuana, duty-free, helping the cash flow. And when the product needs to go to an Amazon facility, our customers transfer goods from Tijuana into San Diego. And from there, we can coordinate the delivery into a specific Amazon DC, or Amazon can schedule their pickup. We're very familiar with routing guides, right? So routing guides where pallets have to be built to a certain spec, to a certain height, X, Y, and Z, or specifications, labeling. Those are the service offerings that we provide, and that's our level of expertise with B2B orders.
Awesome, thank you. Again, any follow-up questions are welcome. One other question we do have is, why is Tijuana suggested as a strategic location to apply the Section 321 logistics?
I think it depends on the customer. I mean, for us, our corporate headquarters is in Tijuana. So for us, we understand the landscape. We understand the relationship that's required with CBP. You know, being over 100-year business, that allows us to really build a foundation. But speaking of other areas, one of the areas that we're expanding to is Mexicali. We have facilities in Mexicali doing Section 321 fulfillment. We're robusting that area. And ultimately, the goal is to have two-area fulfillment, right? So we want to have big warehouses that can fulfill and inject in Laredo to cover all the East Coast, and maintain San Diego as the hub to serve customers that either have heavy West Coast end consumers, or have a split distribution model where we can fulfill both parts of the country at a reasonable parcel rate and a quicker transit time.
Thank you for that response. Well, if there are no more further questions, we want to thank you again, Eddie, for your time, and for all the participants that joined us this morning. Again, if you are looking for further orientation or a specific issue or how to set up a Section 321 for your supply chain, please feel free to reach out and follow us on our social media. Visit our website, where you're going to find more resources. We were going to continue talking about this topic as we have seen the results of how this can impact your bottom line, your business, and provide solutions that businesses need for their supply chain. Again, so thank you so much for your time. And this has been G Global. Thank you for the privilege of serving you.